Rachel burst into the courtroom, red-faced, fists clenched around legal papers. "You gave our house to him? That boy's not even family." Beside me, Caleb, my grandson, Eli's son, stood taller. My late son's eyes stared back at his sister's rage. The judge's ruling was final. The deed was done, and for the first time, I was no longer the mother who stayed silent. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. It was soft in sound, but sharp in meaning. A flick of the wrist that made the white linen napkin flutter, and my hand jolt back like it had touched a stovetop. Her voice followed just loud enough for the others to hear. "Don't touch anything, Mom. You'll knock it over." A hush rippled under the classical piano loop spilling from the speakers. Crystal glasses stilled in hands. Forks froze mid-air. One guest stifled a cough. Another glanced away, embarrassed for me. Or maybe for themselves. Rachel adjusted the flower arrangement like a hostess on television. "It's supposed to look effortless," she murmured through her teeth, still smiling for the room. I stood frozen beside the buffet table, inches from the peonies I'd purchased with my own money. The ones I used to arrange with Eli every spring on the sunlit kitchen counter, before the light in the house dimmed permanently. I took a step back. Someone laughed too loudly in the corner. Plates clinked. The moment passed for everyone else, but it didn't pass for me, because this wasn't new. It was just the first time it happened in public. Rachel, my daughter, had always worn control like cashmere, soft on the surface, suffocating beneath. She hadn't asked to take over the charity brunch this year. She'd told me, over decaf coffee and a smug smile, "Don't worry, I'll handle it. You've done enough." She meant you've become unnecessary. She picked the venue, the caterer, even the framed photos for the donor table. She replaced Eli's with a staged shot of her and Toby on their anniversary cruise. I noticed. Of course I noticed. My husband, Jack, used to say, "Give her time. Rachel will grow up kinder." But he'd been gone 5 years now. Time had come and gone, and Rachel had only grown more polished. Not kinder, just harder to hold accountable. I slipped through the chatter and out the side door. The wind bit at my cheeks, even though the sun was shining. My coat still hung on the chair inside. I didn't care. My keys were in my purse, and the car was parked near the side exit. I walked with measured steps, shoulders back, chin high. If anyone saw me leave, they'd say I had somewhere to be, not that I was running. The moment I shut the car door, the silence hit like a second slap. Not from Rachel this time, but from the part of me that had let this happen, the part that had traded presence for peace, voice for harmony. I'd let her take over my house, my decisions, my events, piece by piece, all in the name of keeping the family close. And each time, I told myself it wasn't a battle worth picking. But now she'd taken it public. I looked down at my hand. It still tingled where she'd slapped it. Not from pain, but from the memory of what it used to do. Hands that raised children, hands that built a home, hands that had every right to touch a vase on their own damn table. I reached for the ignition but didn't turn it. Just sat there, watching the breeze move the tree shadows across the windshield. I could still hear her voice. "Don't touch anything." That was her mistake. She thought I wouldn't. In the hush of my car, I whispered to no one, "Let's see how she likes being a guest in someone else's house." After Jack died, the house felt too big. Too many rooms, too many reminders. Rachel said the move into their home would be temporary, just until I felt steadier. "You shouldn't be alone in a house that size," she told me. "What if you fall?" She meant well, at first. That was 2 years ago. Now I needed a code to open the spice cabinet. At first it was little things, her reorganizing the pantry for safety, labeling shelves, setting timers for the oven. Then came the changes I didn't ask for, the camera above the stove, just so I can check in when I'm at work, and the locked cabinet where she kept my medication. I had to ask her for Tylenol. Then there were the meal plans, not suggestions, schedules, printed in pastel fonts with photos of grilled salmon and quinoa bowls, stuck to the fridge like commandments. I wasn't allowed to use oil anymore. "Too much sodium," she'd say with a practiced smile. "It's not good for your blood pressure, Mom." She never asked if I had high blood pressure. I don't. Rachel's husband, Toby, stayed out of it. His military background taught him to follow protocol, or maybe just to avoid the fallout. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't present either. He moved around the house like a ghost in his own boots. At night, I walked the hallway like a guest in my own life. Eli's room used to be the brightest, covered in posters and light and life. After he passed, Rachel closed it like a wound. Now it held boxes, a treadmill, and silence. I sat on the edge of my bed and thought of him, of our late-night chats about poetry, about how he'd sneak me mini Snickers when Rachel wasn't looking, like we were co-conspirators in sweetness. I reached for the old jewelry box I kept at the back of my closet, not for the pearls, but for what I'd hidden under them, a key to the file cabinet Jack had insisted we store in the attic before he died. He was meticulous, ex-Marine, engineer, father, husband. His hands had always built, protected, stored. I pulled the old ladder down and climbed into the attic where insulation clung to everything like regret. The air was hot, stale. I found the cabinet behind a stack of holiday decorations no one had touched since Eli's accident. The key fit with a familiar click. I opened the top drawer and found what I was looking for, a manila envelope labeled in Jack's handwriting. Property, estate, contingency copy. Inside, the deed to the house. Unaltered. Unsigned. Victor, our longtime lawyer, had once warned me, "If Rachel gets too involved in the estate, make sure your name stands on its own. Keep a clean copy and only sign it when you're clear." Jack must have taken that advice to heart. But it wasn't just the deed that caught my breath. Scrawled lightly in pencil across the bottom corner was a line I hadn't seen before. "Only sign this when she stops being family." Not if. When. The attic light buzzed overhead, casting my shadow across the file drawers like a woman divided. I held the paper in my hands, heavy with weight it hadn't had before. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared. Because something inside me had shifted. I used to think quiet meant safety, but now I understood. Quiet wasn't peace. It was planning. I pressed the folder to my chest, and for the first time in a long while, I whispered back to Jack, "Not yet, but I'm close." The house creaked in the late hours. That particular kind of silence only a widow learns to live inside, the kind you can almost hear breathing. I moved barefoot down the hallway, past the gallery wall Rachel had reimagined with clean lines and neutral tones, the smiling photos of Jack in his garden, Eli in his graduation gown. Gone, replaced with abstract prints from a catalog. The hallway still smelled faintly of Eli's cologne. It lingered in the air vents, clung to the trim near the doorframe. She hadn't been able to erase that yet. I pushed his bedroom door open slowly. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. The twin bed had been hauled out last fall. Now a Peloton sat in the corner, facing a mounted TV, its screen still frozen on a paused cardio session. A bin of yoga mats and resistance bands rested where his bookshelf used to be. The walls had been painted slate gray, cold, sleek, forgetful. His desk was gone, his posters, his baseball caps, the tiny whiteboard where he used to scribble dumb jokes for me to read when I came in with laundry, gone. But I saw the outline where his old corkboard used to hang. I ran my fingers along the ghost of it, the way the walls still remembered what had been there. "It's time to move forward," Toby had said when I'd asked where Eli's things had gone. It's what he would have wanted. He hadn't looked me in the eyes when he said it, just patted my shoulder like I was a ticking bomb he hoped wouldn't go off. But Eli wouldn't have wanted to be erased. He would have wanted light, warmth, music in the kitchen. He would have wanted to leave room for grief, not cover it up with designer rugs and mindfulness podcasts. I sat on the floor beside the dusty treadmill and closed my eyes. It wasn't just Eli who was missing from this house. It was me. And yet, Jack's voice lingered in memory. "The house goes to you, Marilyn. No question. Rachel has ambition. You have history. Don't let her rewrite what we built." He'd said that while folding towels, casual as weather. I hadn't understood what he meant until now. The shrill ring of my cell phone pierced the quiet. I scrambled to my feet and answered before it could echo down the hallway. "Hello?" A woman's voice, software tentative. "Marilyn? It's Lisa Garvey. I was at the brunch on Sunday." My breath caught. I know it's none of my business," she continued, "but I saw what happened. The hand slap. The way Rachel talked to you. It wasn't right." I said nothing. She went on, "A few of us noticed. You don't have to pretend it didn't happen. If you ever need, I don't know, support or just someone to talk to." "Thank you," I said, voice thinner than I wanted. "I appreciate that." After we hung up, I stared at the screen a moment longer. Then I scrolled through my contacts and found Victor's name. Victor Bennett, estate attorney, friend of Jack's, sharp, discreet, kind when it counted. I tapped, "Call." He picked up on the second ring like he always did. "Marilyn," he said, "been wondering when I'd hear from you." "I need to talk about the house," I said, "and about Rachel." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the kind of question you don't forget. "Do you want this house to become a weapon or a witness?" I wasn't protecting money. I was protecting space, mine. The breath between thoughts, the right to slice an apple without being asked if I'd taken my supplements. After that call with Victor, I moved like a shadow through my own house. Quiet, observant, deliberate. He sent over preliminary documents for asset protection, a revocable trust, updated power of attorney, medical proxy, and a new draft of my will. Everything fresh, everything untraceable, for now. I printed the files while Rachel and Toby were out at a neighborhood planning committee. She'd joined last year, probably to keep tabs on who trimmed their hedges too low. Her voice had a way of floating into other people's decisions like steam slipping under a door. The papers came out of the printer with mechanical indifference, one page after another. Legal language, clean margins, signatures lines waiting like open mouths. I slipped them into a folder and tucked it behind a row of untouched cookbooks in the living room hutch. She'd never look there. Rachel hadn't cooked a real meal since Jack's funeral. She was getting worse, more brittle in her power. At breakfast, she took the butter knife out of my hand. "Not on the toast, Mom. I told you. Doctor says limit your cholesterol." I didn't respond, just set the knife down like I was placing a grenade. At a charity luncheon, I commented that I liked the flower centerpieces. She cut in, voice polished for an audience. "Mom's been having some memory issues. We're just keeping things simple for her." There were murmurs after, tight smiles. Someone touched my arm and asked if I needed help to the restroom. That night, I charged an old phone I'd kept in my nightstand drawer for years. I didn't need it for calls. I needed the voice recorder. I started hitting record before we had conversations, especially when Rachel came into my room uninvited, talking about long-term care options and next steps. She was laying a foundation, painting me as forgetful, fragile, but I knew the difference between age and erosion. And I wasn't eroding. I was remembering. It happened on a Wednesday after she left for her massage and Toby was walking the dog. I was digging through the hutch for a recipe I hadn't made in years. Eli's favorite, lemon thyme chicken with roasted shallots. He used to request it every birthday. The cookbook smelled like dust and nostalgia. I flipped through sticky pages, stained with oil and love. And then something slipped out, a folded piece of notepad paper wedged between the pages like it had been waiting. Eli's handwriting, unmistakable, rushed and lean, always in blue ink. "Don't ever shrink to fit what broke you." That was all. No signature, just a truth so clear it made my eyes sting. I read it twice, then 3 times. Then I tucked it into the folder with the trust papers, and I picked up the phone. Denise. We hadn't spoken in nearly 5 years. After Eli died, everything around me blurred. Grief didn't just dull, it disfigured. Denise had been my closest friend once. But when Rachel started blaming me for letting Eli drive that night, Denise pushed back, loudly. Rachel hadn't forgiven her, and in my grief, I'd stayed silent. That silence grew a wall. But walls could be broken. The phone rang 4 times before the line clicked open. A breath, a pause, then a familiar voice. "Hello?" I hesitated, then said, "It's Marilyn." Another breath. Then something softened. "I've been waiting for you to call." I gripped the phone tighter. "I need your help." Denise's voice cracked slightly on the second call, like the grief had aged but never fully settled. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, neutral ground with strong espresso and a waitress who didn't hover. I watched her walk in from the parking lot, the same purposeful stride she'd had for years, only now softer around the edges. She sat across from me and didn't waste time. "She blamed you at the funeral," Denise said, stirring her tea without looking up. "Rachel, you didn't hear it, but I did." My breath caught, but I didn't speak. "She told 3 people, one of them Toby's cousin, that you let Eli take the car that night, that you encouraged him, said you were too lenient, that it was your way of buying his love." I closed my eyes. The coffee shop chatter around us dissolved into a low blur. "She said that?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Denise nodded. "I tried to defend you, but she shut me out, blocked my number, told Toby I was manipulating your grief." I looked at her across the table. "Why didn't you tell me then?" "You were barely standing, Marilyn. You hadn't said Eli's name in weeks. I figured you didn't have space for more betrayal." I swallowed hard. I would have made space for the truth. She slid a flash drive across the table. "I saved these in case you ever wanted them." Inside were screenshots, messages between Rachel and a mutual acquaintance. Rachel's words were sharp, venomous. "She's delusional. She babied him his whole life. Now she's playing the grieving mother like she didn't create the mess." And another, "Eli could have invested in Toby's company. He had the funds. But Mom guilted him into staying close. Classic manipulation." My hands trembled. I tucked them beneath the table to hide it. "She wanted Eli to invest in Toby's business?" I asked. Denise nodded. "Toby was sinking. Rachel saw Eli as a lifeline." "But he said no," I whispered. "He told me he wanted to start a small studio, something his own. He said—" I stopped, the memory too bright, too loud. Denise's voice softened. "He made the right choice, and they never forgave him for it." That night I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a fountain pen Jack had given me for our 30th anniversary. I didn't write for anyone else's eyes. "Dear Eli, I never blamed you for leaving, but I blamed myself for staying quiet too long. Rachel has taken your silence and turned it into her strategy, but I hear you still, in recipes, in music, in the way the light hits the table at 4 p.m. I want you to know I'm not shrinking anymore. Love always. Mom." I folded the letter and placed it in the envelope with the deed folder. Then I called Denise. "Do you still have your real estate license?" I asked. She laughed. "Still renewed every 2 years. Why?" "Would you be willing to buy the house?" I said. "At market rate. Keep me on a life estate, but take the name out from under her shadow." There was a pause. Then, "Marilyn, I would be honored." It wasn't just strategy. It was safety. The house would be mine until I passed, and then it would go to someone who never asked me to shrink for their comfort, but nothing stays hidden forever. The next day, Rachel came home early from work, earlier than expected. I'd printed a copy of the revised property transfer documents, but forgot them in the printer tray in the study. From the kitchen, I heard her voice echo down the hallway. "Mom? Why are your name and Denise's on a real estate file?" My blood went cold. The ceiling seemed to close in. Her footsteps approached, fast, hard, unmistakably angry. I rose from my chair and met her at the hallway's edge. Her hand clutched the papers. Her eyes were fire. Rachel slammed the plate down harder than necessary, 2 slices of dry multigrain toast scraping across porcelain like a warning shot. She didn't sit, just stood there, arms folded, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. "What are you up to, Mom?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stirred my tea, slow, steady, listening to the tick of the grandfather clock behind her. Silence had always been my safest weapon, and I'd learned to wield it like a blade. She didn't like that. "I found the papers," she hissed. "You and Denise? Seriously? Selling the house out from under your own family?" I looked up. "You read private documents from my printer." "They were left out," she snapped. "In our house." "No," I said, setting down my spoon. "It's mine." Rachel barked out a bitter laugh, waving her toast like a baton. "You wouldn't even be here if I hadn't moved you in. You were a mess after Dad died." "I was grieving," I replied. "Not incapable. There's a difference." She took a step closer. "This is your grief talking. You don't know what Denise wants. She's using you." The words landed with no weight. I'd heard them all before. Different subject, same pitch. She used concern as camouflage, and when I didn't comply, she dragged out guilt like a family heirloom. "Rachel," I said, folding my napkin, "I'm not going to argue at breakfast." "Then what are you doing?" Her voice rose. "You're tearing this family apart." I stood calmly. "I'm making sure I'm not erased from my own life." And I walked out of the kitchen. She didn't follow. Later that afternoon, I slid into a nondescript building with a notary office nestled between a bakery and a dance studio. Denise met me outside with a file tucked under her arm, her expression measured, but eyes alert. "You sure about this?" she asked as we entered. I nodded. "I've been sure for years. I just didn't let myself say it out loud." Inside, the notary reviewed the documents, witnessed my signature, and handed me the finalized copy with a neutral expression. It felt clinical, but final, something that couldn't be undone with a tantrum or a guilt trip. Afterward, Denise and I sat in her car. She placed the deed inside a locked glove box. "I'll start the background work on the transfer today," she said. "We'll get the title squared up by next week. You'll still retain the life estate clause. Your house, your decisions, until your last breath." I turned to look at her. "Thank you for standing in the shadow with me before I found my light." She just smiled. "You're not done finding it yet." That night, I cooked myself a real dinner. Nothing measured, no meal plan, no lectures about salt content, chicken pot pie from scratch, just like Eli used to love. I sat at the small round table near the window, the one Rachel always said took up too much space, and I ate in peace. The next morning, I stepped into the kitchen to find Toby waiting there, leaning against the counter like a reluctant referee. He wore that usual mix of tension and avoidance that had become his uniform since Eli's death. "She's upset," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know how she gets. She feels blindsided." "Because she was," I said, placing a mug under the coffee maker. "I just don't want this to spiral," he added. "She's been under a lot of stress." I turned, holding my mug with both hands. "So have I." "I know, I'm not saying you're wrong, just don't escalate this, Marilyn." I tilted my head, studying him. "Then tell her to stop climbing over my back." His silence was the closest thing I'd ever heard to agreement. No email, no phone call, not even one of Rachel's clipped sticky notes left on the fridge with instructions and timestamps. I only found out about the family barbecue when I overheard Toby on a call in the garage. "We'll start grilling around 3. Just bring your kids. Mom's not coming, or not invited." The sting wasn't new, just deeper, like a bruise layered over old ones you thought had already healed. I stood in the hallway, holding the laundry basket like it was a shield. Later, Rachel breezed through the kitchen, humming and adjusting her lip gloss in her phone's camera. She paused just long enough to toss a box of store-bought cookies on the counter. "Back around 7. Don't wait up." "Hosting something?" I asked, casual as tea bags. She didn't look up. "Oh, just a little get-together for Toby's unit. Nothing formal." Then she was gone. Door slammed, tires crunching gravel. I walked slowly to the coat closet, reaching up to the top shelf. The album was still there, leather-wrapped, worn, fraying at the corners. Inside, time was captured in Kodachrome and Polaroid, Eli's third-grade Halloween costume, Rachel's ballet recital, my husband Howard with the grill tongs and a crooked grin. If they were going to rewrite the story, I'd remind them of the chapters they forgot. By 2:45, I was dressed and ready. Not overdressed, just enough dignity in the scarf and pressed slacks to make a point without saying a word. I walked down the driveway with the album tucked under my arm like a guest gift. The sun was hot on the pavement. I didn't mind. As I turned the corner toward the backyard, I heard laughter, clinks of beer bottles, and the crackle of hot dogs on the grill. Toby's booming voice called for mustard, and kids darted between lawn chairs with sticky popsicles. Rachel saw me first. She was holding a tray of deviled eggs, her smile snapping off mid-word like a power outage. "Mom?" Her voice pitched up. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. "Thought I'd drop by. After all, I live here." She set the tray down harder than necessary. A few guests turned, sensing static in the air. "This was kind of a closed RSVP," she muttered, stepping closer. "We didn't think you'd be comfortable." I held up the album. I brought some pictures. Eli always loved these things. Something in her jaw clicked, but she didn't speak. Instead, she gestured toward an empty seat near the edge of the yard, as far from the food table and conversation as possible. A few guests nodded politely, awkward smiles painted over uncertainty. I sat quietly, opening the album across my lap. A little girl peeked over the top, her curiosity winning out over the tension. I showed her a photo of Eli with his tongue blue from cotton candy. "He looks fun," she whispered. "He was," I said. "He was the best of us." Across the yard, Rachel kept glancing at me like a smudge she couldn't wipe away. One woman I didn't recognize leaned in and murmured something to her. Rachel's face flushed. After 20 minutes, I stood, dusted off my pants, and walked to the gate. I left the album open on the chair. On the page with the photo of Rachel and Eli, arms slung over each other's shoulders, both missing front teeth and grinning like the world couldn't touch them. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. Back in my room, I closed the door and exhaled. I picked up my phone and opened Victor's contact. Text, "Let's finish the paperwork." The reply came quicker than expected. "Victor, tomorrow morning, bring your ID." Next day, I went to Victor's office. Victor slid the final document across the polished mahogany desk. "It's all here. Life estate clause is secure. Denise takes ownership upon your passing, but until then, no one, not Rachel, not Toby, not even a court order, can touch this house without your consent." I nodded, throat tight. The law was catching up with my instincts. "Are you sure?" he asked, one last chance for hesitation. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper and signed my name with the same hand Rachel had slapped away just days ago. The curve of the M never looked so sure. When I looked up, Victor smiled, not the polite kind lawyers give, but something gentler. "Congratulations, Marilyn, you just made yourself untouchable." Outside, Denise waited in her car, windows down, hair tossed by the early autumn breeze. She leaned over and opened the passenger door for me. "Well?" she asked. "It's done." She reached into the back seat and handed me a wrapped bundle. "Paint swatches. I figured if it's your home again, it should feel like it." We drove straight to the hardware store. I picked a soft sage for the living room, a dusty rose for the hallway, and a bold navy for the guest bedroom, Eli's old room. Denise nodded in approval, already coordinating fabric options in her head. When we got home, she helped me move the ladder. We didn't repaint right away. First, I cleared the wall Rachel had stripped months ago. Gone were the abstract prints she claimed looked cleaner. In their place, I laid out every photo I'd saved in secret. Eli's graduation, his band's first show, his last birthday. By the time we were done, the wall felt warm again. Real. Denise paused beside it. "He'd be proud of you." I swallowed. He always said I was stronger than I believed. That night, I printed an extra copy of the signed deed and walked into Rachel's side of the house. The guest wing she'd slowly claimed as her own, right down to the monogrammed notepads and fancy pens. I opened her desk drawer. Beneath receipts and color-coded to-do lists, I tucked the deed like a sleeping animal waiting to be found. I didn't add a note. The paper said enough. In the days that followed, I moved differently through the house. Lighter, I made a list for a housewarming brunch, names that had disappeared from Rachel's guest lists over the years. My old book club friends, Denise's cousin I used to bake with, the neighbor who brought soup when Howard passed. I planned everything with care. Quiche? Mimosas? Jazz playlist Eli made me years ago. No one would forget to invite me this time. I was the only name on the lease. Dinner that evening was quiet. Rachel had been in her room most of the day, muttering about account statements and Wi-Fi passwords. She emerged halfway through the baked salmon and steamed carrots I'd made, eyes tired but sharp. She barely looked at me as she walked to her desk with a mug of tea, muttering something about needing to check emails. Then I heard it. A drawer sliding open, a beat of silence, paper rustling, and then her voice rising like a scream swallowed by broken glass. "What is this?" She stormed into the kitchen, deed in one hand, betrayal stretched across her face. "You sold our house? To Denise?" she shrieked, paper trembling in her grip. I sipped my tea and said nothing, because everything I needed to say was already signed in ink. Rachel didn't throw the paper down. She slammed it like a gavel, as if volume could change the legality of ink. "You had no right," she hissed, standing in the middle of the kitchen as if she still owned it, "to sell this house, our house, to her?" I stirred honey into my tea, calm, deliberate. "It's not our house, Rachel. It never was." "You're out of your mind," she snapped. "Dad would never have. Your father left this house to me." My voice stayed low. "The will's in Victor's file cabinet if you'd like to refresh yourself." She paced in short, erratic circles, her nails tapping against her phone. Her breathing was sharp, irregular. "This is revenge," she said finally, her eyes gleaming with accusation. "All of this, the deed, Denise, you're punishing me." I met her stare and let the quiet stretch long enough to weigh something. "No," I said softly. "It's prevention." That froze her. She opened her mouth, but the argument must have dried on her tongue. She turned, stomped down the hallway, and slammed the door to her wing of the house so hard the window panes rattled. But the echo didn't linger like it used to. By morning, I was already at work. Trash bags, storage bins, labels. Her walk-in closet had always been curated like a boutique. Neatly folded cardigans, color-coded shoe racks, designer purses she never paid for herself. I touched nothing of value, just her presence. Piece by piece, I began removing it from the walls. A few hours in, Toby found me taping up the third box. "Need help?" he asked, eyes fixed anywhere but mine. "No," I replied, "but you'll want to move her things before Denise does." He rubbed the back of his neck, his wedding band catching the overhead light. "This doesn't need to get messier." I paused, straightened, and set, the packing tape down. "Toby, you watched it get messy. For years, you stood by while she chipped at my dignity like wallpaper she didn't like." I stepped closer, not angry, just done. "Silence has a side, too. You chose yours." He didn't respond, just gave me a weary nod, and disappeared back into whatever room he used to hide. I finished the rest of the packing in silence. It wasn't just cardboard and fabric, it was a shedding of weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. I left her things stacked by the garage door, neatly labeled, respectful, clear. By sunset, the kitchen was mine again, my kettle on the stove, my plants back on the sill, Eli's photo now sitting where Rachel's Pinterest cookbooks used to live. I sat down with a cup of tea and exhaled, not dramatically, not for effect, just because I could. The doorbell rang just as dusk settled over the lawn. I opened it expecting Denise. Instead, a man in a gray uniform stood holding a manila envelope. "Legal notice," he said. "Signature required." I signed, hand steady, and shut the door before he could offer pity. I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside, a formal letter on legal letterhead. Notice of dispute. Property transfer filed by Rachel Claire Merriman. Grounds: suspected coercion, elder manipulation, mental incompetence. I let the papers rest on the table and stared out the window. She was coming for the house. Again, but this time she'd have to do it in daylight. In court. On record. I picked up my phone, dialed Victor, and said, "She wants a fight. Let's give her the cleanest one she's ever lost." The courthouse smelled like dust and tension, polished wood and old carpet trying to hide a century of conflict. I walked in wearing navy blue, the same color I wore to Eli's memorial. Not for mourning this time, for battle. Rachel sat on the other side of the aisle in a crisp cream suit, her lips painted a color too red for the occasion. Her expression was sharp, measured, until she caught my eye. Then it wavered, just enough to remind me that beneath all that polish, she still hadn't expected me to fight back. The hearing began at exactly 9 a.m. Judge Malden, an older black woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, scanned the docket and lifted her eyes. "We're here for a dispute over transfer of residential property from Marilyn Ames to Denise Howell under a life estate clause. Petitioner claims coercion, mental incompetence, and fraudulent behavior. Ms. Ames, how do you plead?" I stood. "I plead prepared, Your Honor." There was a short rustle of stifled laughter from the courtroom. Even Judge Malden cracked a tight smile. Rachel's attorney began first, his tone syrupy, smug. "Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate a concerning pattern of diminished capacity on the part of Ms. Ames, as well as manipulative influence exerted by Ms. Howell, an old friend with newly found interest once the estate was at stake." I didn't flinch. I let him have his stage. But when he handed the judge a stack of photos showing my pill bottles, notes on the fridge, and Rachel's handwritten timeline of my so-called mental slips, my jaw tensed. Victor stood next, calm, exacting. "Your Honor, Ms. Ames underwent a full mental health evaluation 3 months before the deed was signed. We've submitted results to the court. Neurocognitive baseline, memory, executive function, all within healthy range. Her primary physician, Dr. Miles, has submitted sworn documentation, verifying she is fully capable of making legal and financial decisions." Judge Malden flipped through the medical file, nodded once, then looked over her glasses at Rachel's attorney. "Did your client know about this?" "No, Your Honor." "That's clear." Victor continued. "Furthermore, we have evidence that Rachel Merriman used emotional manipulation and verbal intimidation over an extended period." "Objection? Hearsay," Rachel's lawyer cut in. Victor didn't blink. "Not hearsay. Audio." He pressed play on the file I'd captured months earlier. The room fell into silence. Rachel's voice poured through the speakers, loud and biting. "You don't need to cook. You're embarrassing yourself. Just sit down and stop making everyone uncomfortable." Then came the loud slap. Not skin on skin, but palm on countertop, inches from my hand. My throat tightened even now. But I didn't look away from Rachel. She didn't either. Denise was called to testify next. She held her shoulders high, voice firm. "I've known Marilyn for over 30 years. Rachel cut me out of her life after Eli's funeral because I defended Marilyn. I never forgot. When Marilyn called me recently, it wasn't desperation, it was clarity. And when I offered to buy her home, I didn't do it for gain. I did it to get her out from under her own daughter." Judge Malden asked a few questions: timing, transaction values, appraisal process. Denise answered them like a pro. Every sentence was a sandbag dropped on Rachel's narrative. Rachel never took the stand. Her lawyer must have realized there wasn't much ground left to argue on. At 11:34 a.m., Judge Malden removed her glasses and leaned forward. "This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence, coercion, or fraud. The deed transfer stands. The petitioner's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Court costs will be borne by the petitioner. This courtroom is adjourned." The gavel cracked like thunder. Rachel didn't look at me as she walked out, head high, spine tight, hands trembling. Toby trailed behind her like a ghost with nowhere else to haunt. Victor patted my shoulder gently. "You didn't just defend yourself today. You drew the line." Outside, the fall sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. Denise offered to drive, but I declined. I wanted the silence of the car, the kind you earn, not endure. That night, after the courtroom dust had settled, I poured a small glass of red and sat by the window. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was short, no punctuation, no name. You've made an enemy. I looked out into the dark yard, calm as ever, and whispered, Good. Now I know where they stand. The first stroke of paint landed soft as breath, lavender, not beige. It bloomed across the living room wall like defiance in satin. I stood back, hands speckled, heart steady. For the first time in years, this house was becoming mine in color, not just in contract. The beige had been Rachel's choice. Neutral sells, she used to say, as if warmth were a crime. But I wasn't selling anymore. I was staying and reclaiming. I opened the windows to let the new scent in. Crisp spring air tangled with fresh paint, orange muffins baking, and the faint whisper of eucalyptus from a candle Denise had left on my doorstep. The house felt lighter already, like it had exhaled. 3 days later, I hosted a brunch. Not a fundraiser, not a silent auction, just people I liked and who liked me back. No seating charts, no place cards, just folding chairs in the backyard, mismatched plates, jazz from a Bluetooth speaker, and peach sangria in glass pitchers. I wore denim and sunblock. Denise brought mini quiches. Victor, surprisingly handy with herbs, brought basil from his garden and made crostini. The air was warm, golden, like honey on toast. At one point, a little girl in braids wandered into the house and stood in front of the newly painted wall. She touched it gently with the back of her hand, then looked up at me. "Your house feels kind," she said, matter of fact, then ran back outside to her grandmother. I blinked. That's what I'd wanted it to feel like for years. Not perfect, just kind. Later, Denise found me on the patio, cradling a coffee mug and watching a squirrel dismantle my bird feeder. "You ever think about starting something?" she asked, sitting down. "Like what?" I smiled. "A senior art circle. You've got stories and color and space, and apparently, kind walls." I looked at the lavender and gold that peeked through the screen door. Maybe it's time to create again. For us. For people like us. That night, I started making flyers. Canvas and connection at the top, followed by art, memory, and meaning. Open to anyone over 60 who's tired of being invisible. I tacked one on the grocery store corkboard, one at the library, one on the back of the pharmacy receipt counter. It wasn't loud, but it was me. I also started therapy. Weekly, virtual, soft lighting, and hard truths. The therapist asked about Eli in our second session. I didn't cry, not then. But the week after, I brought one of his baseball cards to show her. It felt like setting something on the table that had been locked in a drawer. Now, Eli's photo, his real one, is back above the mantel. The one with his crooked smile and his favorite flannel, not the polished graduation shot Rachel insisted on keeping. This one has soul. This one laughs when I talk to it. The art circle met for the first time on a Thursday morning. 5 women showed up, 2 with canes, 1 with oils, all with stories. We painted to Aretha Franklin and talked about things no one else asked us about anymore. Our hands trembled, but our lines were bold. I was showing a woman named Gloria how to blend shadow into shoreline when the room fell quieter. I looked up. Rachel stood in the doorway. She wore no makeup. Her hair was in a low ponytail, and for the first time in ages, she didn't look like she was hosting a photo shoot. Just standing there, watching. Her eyes landed on the wall. Eli's picture, the lavender, the circle of women, me. I set down my brush. "Hello, Rachel," I said calmly. She stepped forward, but not too far. "Thought I'd see what you've made of the place." I smiled. "You're just in time for cleanup." She stood at my door, wrapped in a taupe coat and forced warmth. "I thought maybe we could talk," she said, holding the muffins like a peace treaty that had already expired. 5 minutes. Her voice softened. "Please, Mom." It wasn't the please that got me. It was the way she said Mom, like she was trying it on again after leaving it in a drawer for years. I stepped back and let her in. The house smelled like sage and paint. My mug of lavender tea steamed on the counter, still warm. Rachel stood stiffly by the dining table where I'd laid out art supplies, her eyes scanning the walls like a stranger trying to remember what a room used to look like. She placed the muffins down, cleared her throat. I miss our family," she said. "We've both lost so much. Maybe we don't need to lose each other too." I leaned against the counter. "You miss control." Rachel flinched. "That's not fair." "No?" I lifted my tea to my lips. "Timing is funny. You didn't miss me when you filed the legal claim. You didn't miss me when you locked my bedroom cabinet. You didn't miss Eli when you took his picture down." She swallowed. "That was different. It always is. When it's you." Her shoulders curled in just slightly. "You're punishing me." I set my mug down. "Rachel, you think everything is punishment because you were never taught to accept consequence." Her face twisted like she'd bitten something bitter. "I said I'm sorry." "No," I said gently. "You said you missed the version of this where I stayed quiet. That's not the same." She stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the photo of Eli and then to the window. "I just wanted to make things easier." "For who?" I asked. "Me or you?" Silence. That was her answer. Rachel turned toward the door, then paused. "You're different now." "No," I said. "I'm just finally whole." She left without the muffins. I watched her walk down the path to her car. Her steps weren't hurried, just careful, like she wasn't sure what ground she was standing on anymore. I waited until her engine faded down the road. Then I pulled the legal binder from the kitchen cabinet, tucked behind a basket of yarn and envelopes I hadn't opened in weeks. Victor had shown me how to revise everything: will, trust, healthcare proxy, executor rights. I flipped to the page titled Contingent Beneficiaries. My pen hovered, then moved. Clause added, "Rachel Thompson is hereby excluded from all distributions, assets, and possessions. This disinheritance is final and irrevocable." I initialed in the margin, then again at the bottom. I looked over at Eli's photo on the mantel. "You wouldn't have let her speak to me that way," I said aloud. No response, of course. But it felt like breath moved through the room just the same. That night, I emailed Victor the updated page, attached a scanned copy for redundancy. Then I lit a candle. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. Instead, I went back to prepping the next art circle meeting. One of the women wanted to paint her childhood home from memory. I promised I'd bring extra blue. Some legacies are built in silence. Mine was built in resistance, paper by paper, clause by clause. Victor slid the final copy of my will across the polished oak desk. "You sure about this?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything." I signed with a calm hand. In that moment, I didn't feel my age. I felt my clarity. The house, once promised to Rachel in her imagination, would now go to a women's shelter I had quietly researched over the last few months. They helped women in late life recover from financial abuse, family neglect, emotional silencing. My people, apparently. Victor stamped the last page. "That's that. She can file all the motions she wants. This is airtight." I walked out of his office lighter than I had felt in years. The wind outside caught the edge of my scarf and tugged at it like a child needing attention. I let it fall. Back home, I opened Eli's old drawer, still tucked away in the guest room no one used anymore. Inside were his sketches, a few baseball cards, and a journal entry I had read a dozen times, but still wasn't done mourning. "Mom is the only one who really listens. I hope I become that kind of grown-up someday." I wasn't done listening. Not to Eli, not to the world. So I made something out of that ache. I launched Eli's Echo, a local nonprofit dedicated to funding arts programs for children who lost parents. The first event was just 6 people in Denise's cafe basement, 3 grieving mothers, 1 volunteer teacher, a social worker, and me. By the end of the night, we were painting silence into color. That same week, I recorded a podcast interview titled "Elder Doesn't Mean Invisible." We talked about financial control, verbal silencing, daughters who used caregiving as leverage. I didn't name names, but I didn't have to. The inbox flooded within a day. One woman wrote, "My daughter watches me like I'm a child. You gave me the words to speak again." Another said, "You reminded me I'm still the author of my life." I saved them all. But one letter made my hands tremble. It was handwritten, sealed in an envelope with no return address. The handwriting was unsure but steady. "Dear Marilyn, I'm not sure how to start this, but I think I'm your grandson. My name is Caleb. I'm 17. My mom told me last year that Eli, your son, was my father. I only have a few photos, but I heard your podcast, and when you talked about him, I knew it wasn't a lie. You described his laugh. You knew it. I don't want anything. I just wanted you to know I exist, and that I wish I had known him. But I'm glad I found you. Your grandson, Caleb." I read it again, then a third time. Then I pressed it to my chest and wept in a way I didn't know I still could. I had spoken truth into a void, and somehow it had echoed back. I held the letter in shaking hands, whispering, "Eli, you left me a piece of yourself." The first thing I noticed was how much his eyes looked like Eli's, soft around the edges, but wide with questions he hadn't yet learned to hide. He stood at the corner of the cafe, clutching his backpack like it might bolt without him. I had told him to meet me at Denise's, neutral ground, a place with kind lighting and a quieter kind of truth. "Caleb?" I asked, my voice already softer than I expected. He turned, nodded. "Hi, Marilyn." My name out of his mouth was clumsy, like a song he wasn't sure he had the right to hum. But I smiled anyway because there he was, flesh and heartbeat, my grandson. We sat in a booth near the back. Denise had cleared the table already. No menus, no interruptions. Just the two of us and a lemon candle burning low between us. "I brought this," he said, reaching into his bag and pulling out a photograph. A faded Polaroid, Eli, younger than I remembered, holding a squirmy baby in striped pajamas. Mom said she never told him she was pregnant. They broke up before she knew. My hands shook as I took the photo. My son, already a father he'd never know he became. "I'm sorry," Caleb said. "I didn't come for money, or a place. I wanted to know where I came from." My throat clenched. "You came from someone kind, someone brave. He would have loved you." Silence wrapped around us like a warm shawl. I reached across the table and set my hand gently over his. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding on to grief. I was holding legacy. The DNA test had only confirmed what I already saw in his gaze. It came back 99.9%. But even before that, I'd known. I'd known the moment he wrote, "I just wanted you to know I exist." Over the next few weeks, we built something strange and beautiful. I showed him Eli's sketchbooks. We listened to his old playlists, some of which Caleb already knew. He asked what kind of food Eli liked. I cooked it. He asked where Eli used to sit. I kept the chair empty for one more dinner, then invited him to fill it. He told me about his life, mostly raised by his mom, a little fractured, a little quiet. Good grades, art classes. He wanted to be a graphic novelist. I sent him home that night with one of Eli's old journals and a key to the house just in case. Rachel found out 2 days later. I was setting out fresh tulips in the entryway when she stormed in, voice slicing through the walls. "You're just giving him everything? Some stranger you never met?" I didn't look up. "I gave him nothing. He gave me something. That's the difference." "You're replacing Eli." "No," I said, finally turning to her. "I'm remembering him." She folded her arms, face contorted in that familiar cocktail of entitlement and disbelief. "He's not even blood." I walked past her and opened the file drawer, pulled out the updated estate paperwork and held it against my chest like armor. "He's the only one who never asked for anything," I said. "That's why I gave him everything." Her face went pale, then flushed red with fury. "You'll regret this." "I've already lived through my regrets," I said calmly. "Now I'm writing what comes next." She left without another word, slammed the door like a punctuation mark she thought she owned, but the story had moved on. Later that night, Victor came by for the final signature. We sat in the living room, Caleb across from me, quiet but steady. "Last chance to change your mind," Victor said, a lawyer's formality. "I changed my mind years ago," I replied. "This is just the paperwork catching up." I signed the revised deed. Caleb would inherit the house, the foundation, and the copyright to everything I'd written under Eli's echo. Denise witnessed it all, smiling like a friend who knew this chapter had been waiting to be written. As Victor packed the folder, I turned to Caleb and said, "Now it's yours to protect." The house hummed like a heart that finally beat for me. Sunlight spilled through the front windows, painting long gold ribbons across the polished wood floor. The scent of lemon zest and lavender floated through the air, Denise's touch. On the dining table sat a tiered birthday cake, lopsided and perfect, surrounded by mismatched candles, and hand-drawn place cards in Caleb's neat handwriting. I was turning 70. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was winding down. I felt like I was starting something. Guests filled every room, neighbors, artists from the senior circle, women from the shelter I'd begun donating to. Laughter echoed against the walls that once absorbed only silence. And there, in the center of it all, was Caleb, my grandson, my link to Eli, my reason for not fading quietly. He tapped his glass gently. The room settled into a hush. "I didn't know I had family like this," he began, voice steady despite his shaking hands. "I didn't grow up with a father. I didn't grow up with a grandmother. But then I met her." He turned to me. I felt my throat tighten. She didn't just open her home, she opened history, memory, a future. She gave me a family I never had. Applause rose like a wave, crashing softly through the room. I felt Denise's hand brush mine beneath the table. She didn't need to say anything. She knew what this moment meant, what it had cost, what it had rebuilt. As the applause faded, I found myself looking toward the far corner of the room, where, just beyond the garden doors, the reflection of the old house once haunted me, the slap that morning, the way my hand hovered and hers struck it away in front of guests, the way I smiled to cover the sting, the way I walked out. But now the memory was just that, a bruise turned to scar then faded. You don't erase pain, you build over it. I stood, clinked my glass lightly. "This house was never just wood and windows," I said. "It was once a fortress, then a prison, then a museum to someone else's rules. But today, it's mine." Someone cheered. A few laughed. I held up my hand, not to silence them, but to mark the end of a long, long sentence. "I was told not to touch anything," I said, my voice clear, my spine straighter than it had been in years. "But I did. I touched the deed. I touched the truth. I touched legacy." I glanced at Caleb, whose eyes shimmered. "And now, I'm done being erased." I sat down to a round of applause. Not polite, not obligatory. Real. I felt it in the bones that had been ignored, the voice that had been hushed, the hands that had been swatted away. Later, when the guests had left and the last slice of cake had disappeared, I sat out on the porch with Caleb. He leaned against me, not quite a boy, not yet a man, but already stronger than I ever had the chance to be at his age. "Think she'll come back?" he asked, meaning Rachel. "She already did," I said, "just didn't like what she found." He nodded. We didn't speak after that. Just listened to the wind rustle through the garden. I'd replanted it last spring, my choices, my colors. I named each section after something I'd reclaimed: peace, boundaries, self. And as night slid in soft and slow, I closed my eyes.